So, I just want to start off by saying that I didn't even know that a debate between Martin Luther King and a segregationist even took place. So it's definitely a bit of an interesting read for me, just trying to see how well both of them would handle such a uh, topic in a one-on-one debate environment. And it was interesting to see kind of the arguments that both put forth um, for what they really thought about the sit-ins and about the notion of racial justice at the time. And obviously, I think a lot of those arguments are still perpetuated today. And it's a lot of colorful language that we still see used today. I thought one of the more interesting things that was brought up was this notion of the Constitution and laws, and which one should we obey, and this is how you should obey them. Um, Martin Luther King, I do remember him saying this, and it was one of the core pillars of his entire methodology and his ideology was uh, one should argue that a law is unjust and that unjust laws should be gotten rid of. And that these unjust laws were ones, as he put it, uh, uh, an unjust law degrades human personality. And obviously, we can view unjust laws today as ones that take away people's rights. And Kilpatrick came back with the argument basically saying, well, what is a person to say if a law is just or unjust? Because then I can simply say any law is unjust, or something to that manner. Um, and I think it really starts to kind of paint this picture of where the divide was between the two ideologies. And there was a serious disconnect. Kilpatrick was on the side of these people. They can't just say that law is unjust for whatever reason. Um, the store owners and the restaurant owners, they have private property, so they can serve who they want to serve, which is still an argument that we have today. And um, that all these, black students that are going in and doing the sit-ins, they're unruly, and they're not doing it in a civilized manner. And he even went on to say that there was violence that had stemmed from it. And King would kind of retort back with that it was the extremists and people who would take opportunity of the event. Um, and just the kind of general argument that still kind of persuades both sides today. Um, just the fact that once I think really where the disconnect lies is one side wants things to change and the other side doesn't really want things to change. Kilpatrick even goes into this notion of saying Martin Luther King, oh, he wants race blending, and that's bad for us because it upsets thousands of years of society. And that's kind of where he kind of reveals his motive is that, well, things have been this way for thousands and thousands of years, and it's been fine. So why just change? It's upsetting all these big things that are in place today. And King with his uh, with his side, because he's fighting for, he's on the side of the sit-ins, and he views all these laws as unjust. And he even says that these laws are not just unjust, but they go against the Constitution, which is something that Kilpatrick argues against. But that they go against the Constitution and inherently what he calls universal law, which is, well, it's just taking away the rights of people, plain and simple. Um, I don't think he ever quite necessarily specifically states it, but I do think he's of the belief that you can't necessarily just refuse service to a person just because of something that they didn't choose to do. Like, you can't just refuse service to someone who's black just because they're black, because they didn't choose to be black. Um, Although I don't think that's necessarily the heart of his argument, it's probably more of a part of his argument. Um, and another thing he kind of gets into is the common market. Another big argument against the whole, well, the store owners can refuse service to anyone, is, well, these people, the notion about these stores is that they're privately owned, but they're in business because of the public. If someone opens up a store and they own the store, it's a private business, but they make their money and survive off of the public's money, which, again, it's an argument we still have today. Um, And I think this kind of goes very, very deep into what the impact of all of it was at the time. I think a lot of the language that was talked about with laws and constitutionality were valid arguments, but at least I think on Kilpatrick's side, it was just, well, I have to understand they're coming from a legal standpoint and from a lawful standpoint, and I've got to find some stuff to back it up. But I also want to make sure and make it clear that the reason why I side with the segregation policy is because this is the way things have been, and they shouldn't just change out of the blue just because they, quote, need to change. And I think a lot of the assumptions that he holds about King and his supporters and his movement are wrong. I thought the race mixing was a bizarre point because I don't think King ever says anything about race mixing. Um, but you can also understand that Kilpatrick comes from the side of a white system that has dominated American society at that point for pretty much its entire existence. And he feels threatened by even just the smallest little what he calls uprising. He says, they're very militant in their verbiage of what they do. He feels very threatened by the black the black community kind of starting to take a little bit of a forceful stand, and he thinks it's unruly and unlawful, while King on the other side is, we're simply just protesting unjust laws and laws that we believe go against the Constitution. And um, obviously at this time you have Constitution where it's like you can't deny someone rights based on race or anything like that, and the argument continues to go on. Um, I think it's very, very. The 50s, we kind of went to the Vietnam War video, and I think something similar happened with the Vietnamese, um, where yes, we acknowledge that they're there, but we're not going to give them what they want because, well, they started off in the movie and documentary they had a video at the very beginning of the French talking about how great their empire was and how all their colonies made for a great civilization. And I think the French kind of went along with the same argument. Well, it's like, well, we're not just going to get rid of everything and destroy everything just because, people want it that way. We've been dominating this region of the world for decades at that point. And, well, why should it change? Because, look, we're making it better. Um, so I think really the deepest or the biggest part of this is that there was a notion of, on one side, things haven't changed for thousands of years at that point, or hundreds of years, or decades. Why should they change now, especially with with these unruly people who make assumptions about whether a law is just or not? And if a law is in the Constitution, it has to be just, and you have to follow it because that's just the way it is. While on the other side, you have the other argument from King, where it's like any law that's unjust takes away someone's rights and someone's, quote, as he said, a personality. And uh, those are the laws that we're trying to destroy because those laws inherently go against both the laws of the United States and the laws of the universe in terms of human rights. And that was really kind of the point that would go, into the 50s, especially with kind of like the racial divide and the start of the sit-ins, and then into the 60s with the serious climax of the civil rights movement, and then kind of going on to this creation of all these different new independent countries going forward. So